BBOR, Black Box Online Radio, coming to you from West Virginia at heart and from around the globe. And hello, Nedheads. Hello, Black Box Battalion. Today is Thursday, another Dahlia Thursday. Welcome to the show. How's everybody doing? On Thursdays, I talk to you guys about the Black Dahlia murder, one of the most horrific crimes in American history. And in this episode, I will be continuing with the discussions on the book Severed by John Gilmore, as well as responding to your questions and comments. And you guys know the drill. You can hit the like button if you want, subscribe if you haven't, and drop a comment down below if you have something to say about the Black Dahlia, the murder of Elizabeth Short. For larger things, you can send them to me at blackboxonlineradio@aol.com. And I am your host, Box Ned. Last week on the channel, I started discussing the book Severed by John Gilmore, and it's a book that I actually connected with. I'm approaching it with a certain degree of skepticism, but I must say that I liked the way it was structured, and I liked the flow of the writing, so I decided to keep going with it to see just exactly what we're going to find, because Severed by John Gilmore is perhaps the most groundbreaking book on the story of the Black Dahlia murder, and it holds the claim of being the first book that is exclusively dedicated to the murder of Elizabeth Short. And you might be seeing some dates about the publication, about when this came out. The first edition of Severed, as I understand, came out in 1994, and then it was redistributed in 1996 for the 50th anniversary of the Black Dahlia murder. So you might be seeing some conflicting dates about the publication. But I also am going to be very well aware that this book is something that's going to be heavily criticized. A lot of people have taken exception to the writings of John Gilmore. They've taken exception to his research process, and they've also taken exception to the suspect that he has proposed. But I would actually like to look at his own words and see what he says about an introduction to the Black Dahlia case. I quote, "Without exception, all individuals interviewed for one reason or another with any remote connection to the Black Dahlia case were eliminated as suspects. Books and publications purporting to solve the case are nothing more than armchair contrivances with no concrete connection to the unsolved Black Dahlia murder or the real Elizabeth Short." Now, if somebody's going to say that, then they have to be held to a high standard. And this is a very simple case of media persuasion tactics when somebody is trying to discredit all the ways of the past and then say, no, only I can produce the true way, the correct way. You will see this in the true crime world. You will see this in different types of unsolved mysteries, and you will just experience this in life. If somebody's going to say that, oh yeah, well, all the other books about the Black Dahlia case are really not very credible. What is the exact word here? They're just armchair contrivances. Well, they're just people claiming that they are purporting to solve the case. They have nothing to stand on, all of that stuff that you just heard. Well, if he's going to say that about other people, then he needs to be held to a high standard himself, because it is an unsolved case. And it is a challenging subject because, as we've said very clearly on Dahlia Thursday, it doesn't appear that there is a lot of physical evidence. On January 15th of 1947, Elizabeth Short's body was found in Southern California in a very, very horrific setting. But what the killer did was go to great lengths to try and destroy the physical evidence. But let's keep going here. The first of the make-believe so-called Black Dahlia books to appear was a novel written by James Ellroy, using Elizabeth Short's name and her mother's as a springboard into pure fiction. Many other similar imaginative concoctions have followed, bandwagon contenders for successful exploitations as remote from the facts as a group of monkeys to a North Pole glacier. A movie based on James Ellroy's novel has been filmed in Bulgaria and directed by Brian De Palma, a kind of LA Confidential spin-off. It is not the story of Elizabeth Short, De Palma told the New York Times. It is about characters who are impacted and obsessed with what happened to her, a tale fabricated solely for entertainment and hopefully big bucks. Not about Elizabeth Short, the New York Times also states. The first full nonfiction book examining the case was Severed, the true story of the Black Dahlia murder, by John Gilmore. Spanning more than years in the trenches with this subject, the focus and quest was always Elizabeth Short. She was a part of my life, that's John Gilmore talking, before I ever was a writer. Alright though, now as you see very clearly, this again is throwing water on a lot of other people's opportunities. And as far as this book by James Ellroy, I'm definitely going to have to read that in the future. But talking about how it's a novel that is blending fact with fiction, I want to be very clear about something on a personal note. I have no problem with people writing novels that are based on real people if they follow the law and they do things appropriately and in accordance with legal codes. I mean, if they're violating somebody else's rights, that of course is not acceptable. But in terms of writing a novel about a true crime case, I'm not opposed to that at all, as long as people are very clear that it is fiction versus nonfiction. Because what some people like to do, and I think what John Gilmore is talking about, is some people like to take the fictitious story and they blend it into the nonfiction story, but they don't tell you which parts are made up and which parts are not. And they're just expecting that no one is going to do the homework to try and backtrack through everything. And it's creating a false picture for the reader. And then somebody might read the book and say, oh, wow, I have a very good idea about the Black Dahlia case now. But what they don't know is somebody has been feeding them misinformation on purpose. And that is not acceptable. But if somebody is clearly saying, yeah, I'm using Elizabeth Short as a fictitious character, as long as it's done fairly, legally, and even appropriately, if they're going to try and make her out to be a bad person, she's a murder victim. I would never read that book about something that is just going to try and insult her and try and tarnish her reputation. She did not deserve to be murdered, so I would have no interest in a book that would do anything of the sort. But if somebody is going to write a novel about the Black Dahlia that is going to be done in an investigative way, I have no problem with that. Going on, an intriguing byplay into the possibility was the story of Jack Anderson Wilson, a saga of perversion and violence. With the support and enthusiasm of the Los Angeles Police Department's Homicide Division, the possibility of Wilson's involvement in the murder of Elizabeth Short was chased, tracked, and examined to its bitter, unresolved, burnt-out end. Now a cold case for more than half a century, the question is, who killed Elizabeth Short remains an unanswerable riddle as enigmatic as the beautiful girl who was called the Black Dahlia. I remain indebted to the many law enforcement agencies who assisted me in the pursuit and the newspaper reporters and editors for the assistance and courageous candidness. Okay, though, so I do thank John Gilmore for that. But if you do look into Jack Anderson Wilson as a suspect, you might see that he is listed as Gilmore's suspect. I even made an episode about him here on this channel. Jack Anderson Wilson was an informant turned suspect who claimed that he either participated in transporting Elizabeth Short to the house where she was murdered, or that he heard the story of somebody who claimed that they transported her to the house where she was murdered, and he obtained all the details. And then Jack Anderson Wilson would go on to become a suspect himself. As I said, a quick Google search will often see that he is listed as John Gilmore Suspect, the author of Severed. But it sounds like from that introduction, he's like, okay, well, Jack Anderson Wilson was a suspect, but, I don't really think so now. Is that the vibe that you got? That's what I got from reading that. And if he were just to say, all right, I was suspicious about this guy in the past, but I don't think he did it now, he should say that a little bit more clearly. Once again, holding people to high standards. Be very clear about what is certifiable and what is conjecture and what is downright fictitious. No matter what, though, I think that Jack Anderson Wilson is one of the most ridiculous Black Dahlia suspects. He just seems like a low-life criminal thug and not the type of person who is going to commit a meticulous surgical murder and go to these extensive steps to cover up the crimes. But let's move on into the middle of the book, Severed, or the middle of the early sections, to pick up where we left off from last week, talking about the discovery of Elizabeth Short's body. Once again, we are going back to January 15th of 1947, and this is going to take place after the authorities have been there, as well as the reporters. A touched-up rendering of how the girl might have appeared in life was prepared from a headshot photograph on the phone with Captain Donahoe, Brown said. You can't tell much from the original. Her face is bruised and puffed out of shape. We're figuring she was killed quite a while before she wound up in the lot. Maybe she's been in water, so the identification is going to be difficult without the artist working up her likeness, hopefully into a shape recognizable by someone. 200 photographs were hastily printed, and the detectives planned to work around the clock until they came up with her identity, and maybe lead to her killer. When the first extra edition hit the street with the rendering of a Jane Doe, the police lines jammed with calls about runaways and missing daughters and wives. Missing persons reports were checked and rechecked, and Georgia Street Juvenile had reporters in every doorway and window, waiting for a break in the Jane Doe's identity. So one thing that I've heard there is, it sounds really interesting that one of the immediate suspicions is they thought that her body had been preserved in water, because in the early segments that I've done for Dahlia Thursday, in this segment on Black Box Online Radio, is only about 2 months old, mind you, and once again, if you want to follow along, you can hit the like button and subscribe. I fully admit that I'm a newcomer to the Black Dahlia case, but in the early episodes of this series, I talked about the possibility of how Elizabeth Short's body could have been frozen or refrigerated, and when you read other sources, it seems like a lot of people are leaning toward the concept of her body being refrigerated. Now, that could be a forensic calculation to throw off the coroner and the time of death. I mean, it seems like the person who committed the murder was very methodical. It seems like they knew a lot about science. Seemed like they had medical capabilities, not some criminal thug who might have known a thing or two about the human body, who just had some life experience, at the school of hard knocks, maybe. No, this seems like somebody who had medical knowledge, or possibly a butcher or an undertaker. But the early suspicions, it seems, is that her body had been submerged in water to throw off the time of death. And that to me sounds like this could even be something that's much similar than a refrigeration unit or a freezer. How about something like a bathtub? And that is one of the early things that I remember from looking at the Black Dahlia case because of the Zodiac killer mystery, and that one hypothesis is that Elizabeth Short was murdered in a home with a bathtub, and her body was just drained of blood in a very simple, ordinary bathtub. But that could easily be a place where you would submerge her body in water. Just sharing something from the book. Let's continue. In the Examiner's City room at 11th and Broadway, Assistant Managing Editor Warden Woolard was pushing for a second extra when he thought of the sound photo machine. The rewrite men were putting together stories as fast as the phones were answered, and the regular crews were being summoned and reporters were calling in tips every 30 minutes. The victim's prints had been airmailed, special delivery to the FBI in Washington, but the night editor had complained that the prints might not even get to the FBI because of storms and airplanes being grounded. It could take a week, but before there's any word, he said. Woolard said, "We could send the prints over the wire on the sound photo. It's never been done, but I can't see any reason why it wouldn't work." And it's my understanding that sound photo was the predecessor to the fax machine. The wires were closed for the night, but International News Photo Wire would open at 4 o'clock in the morning. It's not going to take any longer to send one print sheet than any other photograph, Woolard said. He suggested calling for Donahoe for a copy of the prints. They can be wired in the first thing in the morning. We can have an FBI agent standing by the Hearst Bureau to hand carry it straight to their files. So it really seems like they were trying to work very hard on this case from the very beginning. And I've said it once and I'll say it again. There's that famous show out there called 48 Hours, and it's called that because you either solve a crime in the first 48 hours or you get the solid lead in the first 48 hours. 48 hours is your investigation, and I mean, this could really point to the killer, so it seems like they really were trying to get this done. Donahoe agreed to wiring the prints for Washington for a possible acceleration of the process, though Hansen felt it wasn't the right protocol. He knew Donahoe was in cahoots with the Examiner's editor. Hansen wanted no part of that. He only wanted to know who the dead girl was. At 4:02 the following morning, the sheet of prints went over the wire. With the time difference, it was a little after 7 o'clock in Washington, D.C. The FBI chief and an FBI agent standing by the receiving photo wire received the wire photo, but the agent immediately detected a problem with the prints. "They're too blurred to yield a classification," he said. "There's defects and blanks in the swirls," he suggested. He suggested the examiner enlarge and build up the prints in a way that would magnify the defects into a readable presentation. The examiner's photo department immediately made a separate 8 by 10-inch enlargement of each print, a tedious and time-consuming process. They then leased a special sound photo wire to Washington, and each of the separate prints went out. Within minutes, the FBI was able to identify Jane Doe number 1. Her fingerprints were on file from a civilian job application taken at an Army base located north of Santa Barbara. Though it had been 4 years earlier, the girl was described as 5 feet 5 inches tall, with her height and with her weight at 115 pounds, brunette, blue eyes, light complexion. Her place of birth was Hyde Park, Massachusetts, July 29, 1924. She was only 22 years old at the time of her death. Her name was Elizabeth Short. She did not have a middle name. Within days, the detectives would learn that in Hollywood she was called the Black Dahlia. And once again, these are the writings of John Gilmore in the book Severed. So it appears that there's a very popular conception out there that Elizabeth Short was identified in 59 minutes, that they took the photos of her hands and they made the fingerprints, and then they sent them to Washington. Like, again, if you just listen to YouTube videos and podcasts, you will probably hear that she was identified in 59 minutes. And what it sounds like is there was actually a very painstaking process that took place before that. It sounds like they're not even talking about the same day. It's not till 4 a.m. on the next day that they're actually able to send these prints out to Washington, and they're identified through the FBI office, according to John Gilmore. And you will find conflicting stories as well, because another thing that has been posted very clearly on the internet and plastered around is that that Elizabeth Short's prints were taken from an arrest that she had earlier. I mean, you've all seen the mugshot of Elizabeth Short, and that she had been arrested previously, and that's why her fingerprints were on file. According to John Gilmore's book, they were obtained from Washington because she had worked, again, for the military, and she had been fingerprinted. And I do think that their description of sound photo does sound like what a lot of people call it, the predecessor to the fax machine. But this 59-minute thing, that just seems like a misrepresentation. Okay, it seems like there was a portion of the story where they're able to send the sound photo, and then once they get the correct images, then they're able to identify her within minutes. However, it's like they left out all the hard work, and only what people are talking about is the final hour of actual work that went through. So let me know what you think about anything here. Does anything stand out to you? And I have a challenge question for you in this episode. What do you think about the possibility of Elizabeth Short being killed at home and having her body submerged in water? Or I should say, killed in somebody's home, killed in somebody's house. No industrial freezer, no commercial freezer. She was murdered. She was slaughtered in a bathtub. She was drained of blood in a bathtub, and her body was kept in water for a period of time. What do you think about that? And my biggest concern is that I'm not a medical examiner, but even somebody like me, a novice to the world of forensic sciences, would expect that submerging somebody in water might not throw off the cause of death the way that refrigeration or freezing would. I would expect that there are different things because, I mean, you're talking about water at room temperature versus water that's nearly freezing. And wouldn't that affect the body's decomposition differently? So I would definitely be leaning more toward the refrigeration or freezing unit myself. But I'm just sharing something that was discussed in the book because this is an unsolved case. And even though it seems like people were working very hard at the beginning, it's still an unsolved case all the same. But there was another thing that I wanted to do for this episode, and that was to look at some of the details about the life of John Gilmore, because he is one of the guys who talks about how he was just part of Hollywood in the middle part of the 20th century. And if you go through his Wikipedia, even, it's going to say that he knew all these people. There's even an interview that he did about knowing Marilyn Monroe. And he's not the only person to do this. Countless people do this, where they're just like, oh, yeah, I was friends with everybody back in Hollywood. I was friends with everybody back in California back in the day. I knew everybody, and here are all my stories of interacting with people who are more famous than I am. And it's not only John Gilmore, because we also have a Black Dahlia suspect named George Hill Hodel, who was the doctor to the Hollywood elites in charge of the venereal disease unit in Los Angeles, as well as Hollywood, so he knew all the secrets of the stars, right? As I said, John Gilmore is not the only person to have claimed this stuff, but I would like to look at just one section here. In 1994, John Gilmore wrote a book that chronicled the famous Black Dahlia unsolved homicide. Occurring in 1947 at a time when his father was on the police force, Gilmore's book Severed, the true story of the Black Dahlia murder, earned him wide recognition according to the Publisher's Weekly Review. In the book, Gilmore presents evidence that strengthens the LAPD's case against the chief suspect, Jack Anderson Wilson, a reclusive alcoholic burglar and possible serial killer. Oh, is he going to strengthen that case? It sounds like from his own introduction, he's saying, all right, well, there really isn't that much of a case for Jack Anderson Wilson. I mean, nobody can actually solve this thing. It seems like that's what he's giving as a condition or a precursor, or just saying, I'm not actually going to solve this thing. All right, there is a suspect named Jack Anderson Wilson, but nobody knows. Oh, well, if nobody knows, well, then why did you bring him up? And I'm only being a little bit harsh because I think Jack Anderson Wilson is a ridiculous suspect, a reclusive alcoholic burglar. I don't think that Elizabeth Short was killed by a reclusive alcoholic burglar. I think that she was killed by somebody who had a much higher understanding of medical knowledge than the reclusive alcoholic burglar. Now, was Jack Anderson Wilson a possible serial killer? Maybe we can do that in the future. We can do a future episode on that and look at the other crimes that he committed. I do have a suspect profile episode about him. That's almost exclusively talking about the connections to the Black Dahlia case, and I invite you guys to check that out, as well as looking at some of the other Black Dahlia episodes that I've done on this channel. But I'm going to continue here. Marilyn Manson, who made paintings based on photos from the book, said, "Severed is my favorite book. John Gilmore is my favorite writer. It has been my desire to direct Severed as a movie, my directorial debut." And to be on the side of Marilyn Manson for once, I can understand why he liked this book. I don't know what it is. I said it's something about the flow of the writing, but I find it to be very engaging. I find that Severed by John Gilmore is much more engaging than a lot of other true crime books that I've looked at over the years. But yes, Marilyn Manson wanted to direct Severed, the true story of the Black Dahlia murder, but it turned out that the rights for the film were in possession of somebody else. John Gilmore's second 1996 release received praise from the New York Times for his story on the life and crimes of the murderer Charles Schmid. And Charles Schmid was a serial killer from Arizona called the Pied Piper of Tucson, one of the more bizarre serial killers out there, who would wear prosthetic putty on his face, and he would put papers and stuff in his shoes to make his feet look bigger. Very, very bizarre individual, and bizarre in a destructive way. But for this episode, I told you guys that I was going to discuss your comments from last week's episode, also on the book Severed by John Gilmore, and there are several things that came in. Firstly, we have one that is from Chickadee here, and Chickadee, thank you for the comment. It says, "You just answered a question that I commented on another one of your videos. I asked if there were any other victims that could have pointed to him being a serial killer. Well, in this one, if you mean the Black Dahlia Avenger, a lot of the psychological profiles are suggesting that the Black Dahlia Avenger was indeed a serial killer, that this either wasn't the first or wasn't the last, and I'm going to be very frank with you. I'm shocked that this is the only crime. I'm shocked that this is the only crime of this caliber, because you would expect that somebody who is so methodical that they're going to commit a crime like this is going to be committing another type of murder. Normally, somebody does not do this as a one-off time. Now, you might be asking the question, well, is it possible for a serial killer to only kill once? Well, no, not a serial killer. That would not meet the definition of a serial killer. So let me rephrase the question. Is it possible for a murderer to only kill once? Yes, in that case, it would be possible. But in terms of probability, I've learned this from the D.B. Cooper case that the most frequent types of crimes that are happening as one-offs are from individuals who are doing things like bank robberies and heists, and it seems like money is more involved in those cases, like maybe D.B. Cooper, which you can hear about every Friday here on Black Box Online Radio. But in terms of a murder, normally people have a murderous rage that leads to a murderous addiction. So I'm shocked that this is the only crime specifically done in this way. And maybe it's just a very methodical serial killer who committed the crimes differently so he wouldn't get caught. And I've been talking a lot about that on Zodiac Monday. When I've been doing episodes about the Zodiac Killer recently, I've been doing a movie segment where I'm looking at films from the 1940s, 50s, and 60s, and you will see that these ideas were shared very clearly in film noir from that time, when you have someone just simply saying, I'm a killer and I'm going to commit the crimes differently to confuse the police. And that's it. That's the exact motive. That's the exact agenda. So is this a serial killer who could have changed things up a bit? I wouldn't be surprised at all. But only looking at the facts, we only have one Black Dahlia murder. We only have the Black Dahlia Avenger. We don't necessarily have an Avenger who has targeted multiple women. And we also have a statement here from Chickadee that says, I do believe he lived in the area, or he was very familiar with the area. He was methodical and secretive, had medical knowledge, and this may have been a personal killing. Hey, Chickadee, you and I are on the same page. I think all of those things are true. May have been a personal killing, because as of now, I do not know how much of an interaction this person had with Elizabeth Short prior to her death. And you know what? Nobody knows. And this could be one of the reasons why the killing was never solved, why the murder was never solved, because the perpetrator may simply just not have had a lot of previous interactions with Elizabeth Short, so the authorities didn't know where to look. He may have known or had previous contact with the victim. Perhaps this was a revenge killing for something he perceived that she did in an interaction that triggered something in his personality. Yes, I mean, ultimately I think so. Either that or it was her physical appearance, that something about her appearance just turned him on in the wrong way. The Glasgow smile mutilating her face suggests this to me. He was probably a psychopath and good at hiding his true nature, just speculating. I'm loving your videos on this case. What happened to Elizabeth Short was horrific, an actual nightmare, and I'm sad the killer was never brought to justice. Well, Chickadee, thank you so much for that there, and I really do appreciate you tuning in to Dahlia Thursday, and it is absolutely horrific, and it is absolutely horrifying, but something about the Glasgow smile does suggest that this could be a man who was rejected by Elizabeth Short, or maybe he just thought that he was going to be rejected, somebody who wanted to dominate her, and to do it in a very calculating way. Our next one comes to us from Silver Stuff, who says, Wow, Ned, you surprised me. I thought the Black Dahlia Red Rose book was an excellent book on the case. And we actually had another comment come in from Brian Joseph, who says, I thought the Eat Well book was interesting. Even so, not every book is for everyone. Alright, so some people are calling me out for last week's episode when I was discussing the book Black Dahlia Red Rose, and I've only gone through the early chapters of that book, and I said that it was unbelievably boring. Yeah, absolutely, we're just different, and I'm totally shocked that I found myself engaging with the book Severed by John Gilmore. I thought that I was going to hate this book, because anytime I watch one of the Larry Harnish AMAs where he starts talking about the Black Dahlia, he begins to trash John Gilmore and his book Severed. But when I'm sitting back and reading it, I'm just thinking, everything that you've heard now, like you heard from, in the early sections of this video, you heard a chapter from Severed, and I find it to be absolutely compelling. It gets right to the point. It tells the story. It has either factual recounts or possible factual recounts. I know that this book has been heavily criticized, but at the same time, I'm just thinking, it's definitely got my attention, and I think it's just different personalities, different preferences. Maybe I like the flow of the book Severed, and I don't like the flow of Black Dahlia Red Rose, but I'm absolutely Not Going to Abandon Black Dahlia Red Rose by Pew Eatwell. Number 1, I'm extremely curious what she has to say. Number 2, she's going to look at a suspect named Leslie Dillon, who is one of the most widely discussed suspects in the Black Dahlia case. And number 3, I paid for the book, so I might as well read it. And I've also told you guys that when it comes to looking at recommendations and ideas and books that people have shared, I almost always get to them, even if it takes me a while. And there's also another quotation and comment that came in from Silver Stuff here that is going to be talking about John Gilmore's book Severed, which you've heard in this episode, and it says, I hope I can ask you, there are at least 5 different book covers for Severed on the selling site, and the prices range from $7 to $50. Is there anything important in the newer, more expensive versions? I had the impression that it was all sort of an exploitative book, but I see you quote from it. Well, Silver Stuff, I had heard all of the same things, and as I said, Larry Harnish does the monthly AMA sessions about the Black Dahlia case, and one book that he is horribly critical of is Severed by John Gilmore, saying that he misrepresented the facts, that he was not honest, that he is also blowing the subject out of proportion. Yes, I've heard that it's an exploitative book, but I'm quoting from it because I wanted to read it for myself. I wanted to share things with you guys. I wanted to examine what John Gilmore was saying. And let's not kid ourselves. Even though I'm saying, stuff like, I like the flow of the writing. Okay, I like the flow of the writing. That does not mean for a second that this book is going to be a good book or a bad book. I don't know enough about it yet, and as I learn things, I'm going to share them with you. As I've said, this is a new segment, and out of all the cases that I talk about on Black Box Online Radio, this is one where I am the biggest newcomer. I'm the least familiar with the Black Dahlia murder. So I'm going to see what John Gilmore has to say, and I'm going to share my findings with you guys. I'm going to share quotations from him with you guys, and then we're going to find out where the truth is. But about liking the flow of the writing, have you heard of a book called Zodiac by Robert Graysmith? Now, I didn't read that book until 2023. I read, Zodiac Unmasked and other things from Graysmith in the past. But somebody was like, Ned, you've never read the book Zodiac by Robert Graysmith? And they gave me a copy. That book is excellent in terms of the flow of the writing, but as we all know, Robert Graysmith took creative liberties when it came to crafting a story. Not everything in Zodiac by Graysmith is factual, and it seems like John Gilmore may have been doing some similar things. Or I should rephrase that. There are allegations against John Gilmore that he did those things, that he took creative liberties, and he may have done things that he was criticizing other people for in his own introduction, saying that, okay, now, when people are doing this, they're actually putting out novels and it's fictitious, and they don't actually know how to solve the case. All right, well, are you in that book, John Gilmore? And, I can't really ask him about it now. So my simple answer is to just try and read everything and try and get as close to the truth as I possibly can. But what do you think about anything that you've heard in this episode? What do you think about anything that has been discussed? Have you read Severed by John Gilmore? Have you read Black Dahlia Red Rose by Pew Eatwell? And I'm just going to keep going here on Dahlia Thursday. And I thank you so much to everybody who has followed along with this episode and this series. And there will be some new things here on Black Box Online Radio starting next week. There will be a new series on the disappearance of Maura Murray starting on Tuesday. I was doing a segment about the disappearance of Madeleine McCann, but a lot of you guys gave me some great recommendations for the disappearance of Maura Murray, so I'll be starting that series next Tuesday to anyone who's listening to this as it's coming out live. And if you're listening to this in the future and you're curious about the Maura Murray case, please check out some of my episodes. Every Monday I talk about the Zodiac Killer, every Wednesday about Jack the Ripper. You're listening to Dahlia Thursday now, and on Fridays I talk to you about D.B. Cooper. I also release shorts and reels Monday through Friday here on YouTube as well as on Instagram and Facebook. My Facebook name is Ned DeHaan. My Instagram name is blackboxonlineradio. And if you want to support all of these efforts, you can go over to buymeacoffee.com, buymeacoffee.com/blackboxned88, and that allows you to make a donation or contribution to help support the show. And anybody who makes a donation will get a shout out on Zodiac Monday. This show is available for free downloads on Spotify and Apple Podcasts under the names Black Box True Crime or Black Box Podcast. And you can also get the images that you see going by on the screen. They are archived at True Crime Designs on Facebook. True Crime Designs. And that will be all for me now. And please, share anything you want about the Black Dahlia murder, and I will see you tomorrow for an episode about D.B. Cooper. Until next time.